I am not speaking to everyone tonight. If you're someone who lives comfortably on the surface of things, if your mind rests easily at night, if your thoughts move in straight lines instead of spirals, this probably isn't for you. This is for the ones whose minds refuse to stay quiet, the ones who notice things they wish they didn't, the ones who see patterns in people long before those people realize they're being rayed, the ones who sit in a room full of laughter and still feel the strange awareness that most conversations are performances. If that sounds familiar, then you already know something about the weight I'm talking about. Because awareness isn't the gift people pretend it is. And it's not clarity, it's not enlightenment, it's not some poetic ability to see the world in deeper colors. Awareness is pressure. It's the constant sensation that your mind is watching everything at once. People reactions, micro-expressions, tones, contradictions, like an internal observer that never stops taking notes. And the worst part, you can't turn it off. Most people live inside their experiences. They feel emotions as they come. They believe words as they're spoken. They accept moments exactly as they appear. But some of us, we don't just live inside moments. We analyze them while they're happening. While someone is speaking, we're already reading the hesitation between their words. While someone is smiling, we're already noticing the tension around their eyes. While someone is telling a story, we're quietly mapping the parts they're leaving out. And eventually you realize something unsettling. Most people don't actually want to be seen that clearly. Because when you truly observe people, you start noticing the things they work very hard to hide, insecurity disguised as confidence, kindness mixed with quiet resentment, honesty tangled with subtle manipulation. It's not that people are evil, it's that people are complicated. And most of the time, they don't even understand themselves. But when you're someone whose mind constantly studies everything, you start seeing those contradictions everywhere. At first, it feels like insight. Then it starts to feel like isolation. Because once you see too much, normal conversations begin to feel strange. You hear things others don't notice. You sense emotional shifts before they're spoken. You understand motives people never admit, sometimes not even to themselves. And slowly, something changes in you. You stop reacting the way others react, not because you're cold, not because you're detached, but because your mind is already 10 steps deeper than the moment everyone else is experiencing. And that distance changes the way you exist in the world. People start calling you quiet. They say you're mysterious. Some say you're intense. A few might even say you're intimidating. But none of those words are really accurate. What they're sensing isn't mystery, it's observation. You're watching. Always watching. Not in a judgmental way, just in a way that's impossible to stop. You study people the way some people study books. You notice the way someone's voice tightens when a certain topic appears. You notice who laughs too quickly at jokes that aren't funny. You notice who changes their personality depending on who enters the room. You notice the tiny moments where someone's real emotions slip through the mask they're trying to maintain. Most people never see those moments. But once your mind learns to notice them, you start seeing them everywhere, and that's when the real question begins forming in the back of your mind. If everyone is performing, what is real? That question changes things, because once you start asking it, the world begins to feel different. Conversations feel layered. Friendships feel more complicated. Even silence starts carrying meaning. You begin realizing that what people say is only a fraction of what they actually mean. And you begin understanding something even more unsettling. You're not just observing others, you're observing yourself too. You notice your own reactions. You study your own emotions. You watch your own thoughts forming before they fully arrive. Your mind becomes both the thinker and the observer of the thinker, and that level of awareness, it can become exhausting because there's no escape from it. No quiet place where your thoughts stop analyzing the world. Even when you're alone, your mind keeps moving. It revisits conversations, replays interactions, examines moments from different angles, sometimes hours later, sometimes years later. And people who don't live this way rarely understand it. They say things like, just stop overthinking, as if awareness were a switch you could flip. But they don't realize something important. Overthinking isn't the right word. Overthinking implies unnecessary thoughts. What this is relentless perception. Your mind simply refuses to accept the surface of things. It keeps digging and digging and digging until it reaches something real. The problem is, reality isn't always comforting. Sometimes what you discover underneath people's words is insecurity. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's quiet selfishness hiding behind politeness. And sometimes it's pain that people are pretending doesn't exist. When you see those things enough times, something in you starts changing. You stop expecting people to be exactly what they appear to be. You stop assuming that smiles mean happiness. You stop believing that confidence means strength, because you've seen the cracks too many times. But here's the part no one talks about. The deeper your awareness becomes, the more aware you become of your own darkness. You start noticing the thoughts you would never say out loud, the sharp observations that feel too honest to share, the quiet judgments your mind forms automatically, the emotional weight you carry that others never see, and suddenly you realize something unsettling. The mind that reads everyone else is also reading you, every fear, every contradiction, every moment where your own behavior doesn't match the person you think you are. It's like living with an internal mirror that never looks away. Some people call that self-awareness. But sometimes it feels more like interrogation. Because once you see your own complexity clearly, you lose the comfort of believing simple things about yourself. You can't pretend your motives are always pure. You can't pretend your emotions are always logical. You can't pretend you're immune to the same contradictions you notice in others. You start understanding something deeper about human nature. Everyone is layered. Everyone is contradictory. Everyone carries shadows they rarely admit exist. And the more aware you become of those shadows, the harder it becomes to pretend they aren't there. For some people, that realization creates empathy. For others, it creates distance. For a few, it creates a strange combination of both. Because once you understand the darkness in people, you also understand their struggles more clearly. You see why someone hides behind humor. You see why someone becomes defensive when they feel exposed. You see why some people avoid depth entirely because they're afraid of what they might find there. But understanding people doesn't always make life easier. Sometimes it makes it heavier, because now you're carrying knowledge most people never notice. You're aware of emotional currents beneath ordinary conversations. You're aware of tension hidden beneath polite behavior. You're aware of the silent battles people are fighting behind their smiles. And eventually you realize something strange. The world isn't shallow, it's just full of people pretending it is. And the ones who stop pretending, the ones who start seeing clearly, the ones whose minds refuse to stay asleep, they often end up feeling like outsiders in a world built on comfortable illusions. But here's the truth most people never say out loud. Awareness may isolate you. It may exhaust you. It may force you to confront realities others never have to think about, but it also does something powerful. It makes you impossible to manipulate easily. It makes you difficult to deceive. It makes you capable of seeing patterns others walk directly into. In other words, it makes you dangerous in a quiet way, not dangerous because you harm people. Dangerous because you understand them, and the moment someone truly understands human nature, they stop being controlled by it. There's something people don't warn you about when your mind begins to see too clearly. At first, awareness feels powerful. You notice patterns others miss. You understand reactions before they happen. You read the quiet language people speak without realizing they're speaking it. For a while, it feels like an advantage, like you've unlocked a layer of reality that others are simply unaware of. But eventually the novelty fades, and what remains is the weight, Because when you see too much, you also realize how much of the world is built on things people don't want examined too closely. Small lies, convenient assumptions, emotional shortcuts that keep life moving without forcing anyone to question themselves too deeply. Most people rely on those things without realizing it. They believe what feels comfortable. They say what keeps the peace. They avoid the questions that might complicate their understanding of themselves or others. And if you're someone who sees clearly, you start noticing those patterns everywhere. You notice how people change their tone, depending on who they're speaking to. You notice how honesty is often carefully edited to protect reputation. You notice how people avoid difficult truths by wrapping them in humor, distraction, or silence. None of this makes people evil. It just makes them human. But once your mind becomes aware of these layers, it becomes harder to participate in the illusion that everything is simple. You start realizing that conversations aren't always about what's being said. Sometimes they're about what's being avoided. And avoidance is one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. People avoid admitting insecurity. They avoid confronting their fears. They avoid acknowledging their contradictions. Because once those things become visible, the version of themselves they've built begins to shake, and most people will do almost anything to keep that version intact, so they perform not intentionally, not maliciously, just instinctively. The same way animals instinctively protect themselves when they feel exposed. But if your mind has learned to observe deeply, you see those performances as they happen. You see the moment someone shifts their personality to match the expectations in the room. You see the moment someone laughs at something they didn't find funny. You see the moment someone changes the subject because the truth is getting too close. At first, you might try to ignore it. You tell yourself you're overanalyzing. You tell yourself people are simpler than your mind wants to believe. But the patterns keep appearing. Again and again and again. Until eventually you stop questioning your perception. And you start questioning something else entirely. You start questioning reality as people present it. Because once you've seen the mask slip enough times, it becomes impossible to believe the mask is the whole face. That realization changes how you interact with the world. You begin speaking less, not because you have nothing to say, but because you're aware of how easily words can be misunderstood. You become careful with honesty, not because you want to hide the truth, but because you've learned that truth can feel threatening to people who aren't ready to hear it. You learn to observe before you react, to listen before you respond, to watch people long enough to understand who they are beneath the roles they play. And that patience creates something interesting. It makes you difficult to read. Because while others are busy expressing themselves openly, your mind is gathering information quietly. You notice the difference between someone's public personality and their private emotions. You notice who becomes uncomfortable when silence lasts too long. You notice who fills every quiet moment with noise because they're afraid of what might surface if they stop talking. Silence is revealing that way. It's amazing how much people expose about themselves when they're trying to escape stillness. And if you're someone comfortable with silence, you become something unusual in most social environments. You become a mirror. People begin projecting their own thoughts into your quietness. Some assume you're judging them. Some assume you're analyzing them. Some assume you're distant or mysterious. But the truth is usually simpler. You're just watching. Not in a hostile way, just in a way that most people aren't used to. Because observation without performance is rare, most interactions in the world are built on a constant exchange of reactions. Someone speaks. Someone responds. Someone laughs. Someone agrees. Someone adds another story. But when one person stops participating in that rhythm and simply observes, the dynamic changes. It creates space, and space makes people aware of themselves. That awareness can make them uncomfortable. They start wondering what you're thinking. They start wondering what you've noticed. They start wondering what parts of them might be visible in ways they didn't intend. That's why deep observers often make people uneasy without saying a word. It's not intimidation, it's reflection. When someone realizes they're being seen more clearly than expected, they begin seeing themselves more clearly too, and self-awareness can feel like exposure. But here's the strange paradox. Even though people sometimes feel uneasy around someone who observes deeply, those same people are often drawn to them. Because part of every human being wants to be understood, even if understanding feels risky. Even if it means parts of them might be revealed. That's why people sometimes open up unexpectedly around someone who listens more than they speak. They sense the attention. They sense the presence. They sense that their words are actually being received instead of simply acknowledged. And that kind of listening is rare. In a world where everyone is trying to be heard, someone who truly listens becomes magnetic. But that role has a hidden cost, because the more people reveal to you, the more you carry their stories, their fears, their regrets, their insecurities, their quiet struggles that they rarely admit to anyone else. And if you're someone who feels deeply as well as observes deeply, those stories stay with you. They echo in your mind long after the conversation ends. You start realizing how much pain people carry behind ordinary lives, how many silent battles exist beneath everyday interactions. How many people walk through the world pretending they're fine because they don't know how to explain what they're feeling. And slowly, the world begins to feel heavier, not darker, just heavier, because awareness reveals something most people overlook. Everyone is struggling with something. Some hide it well. Some hide it poorly, but almost no one escapes it completely. And when you see that clearly enough, something inside you changes. You become less judgmental, but also more careful, because you understand how fragile people can be beneath their confidence. You understand how easily a careless word can touch a wound someone never intended to reveal. You understand how much complexity lives inside every human mind. And that understanding creates a strange sense of responsibility. When you see deeply, you realize that power exists in perception. The ability to understand someone's emotional structure can either protect them or hurt them. It can offer empathy or manipulation. It can create connection or control. And once you recognize that power, you're forced to decide what kind of person you want to be. Some people use perception as a weapon. They study weaknesses and exploit them. They learn emotional patterns and manipulate them. They become skilled at controlling others without those people realizing it. But others choose a different path. They use awareness as protection, not just for themselves, but for others. They become the person who notices when someone is struggling quietly, the person who senses when someone needs understanding instead of advice, the person who recognizes pain even when it's hidden behind humor or sarcasm. That kind of awareness isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, but it changes lives in subtle ways, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer another human being is the feeling that they've been truly seen, not analyzed, not judged, just understood. And when someone experiences that kind of understanding, even briefly, it can shift something inside them. It can remind them they're not invisible, that their inner world matters, that their struggles aren't as isolated as they believed. But for the one who sees deeply, the journey continues inward as well. Because the more clearly you see others, the more clearly you begin to see yourself. And that is where the real confrontation begins. The confrontation with your own mind, your own motives, your own shadows. Because awareness doesn't stop at the outside world. Eventually it turns inward. And when it does, you discover that the most complicated person you will ever try to understand is yourself. There's a moment that happens quietly in the life of someone who observes too much. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic realization. It doesn't appear during some life-changing event. It happens in silence. A moment where you suddenly become aware of something strange. Your mind is not just thinking, it's watching itself think. At first, the realization feels subtle. You notice a thought forming, and at the same time, another part of you is analyzing that thought, not judging it, not stopping it, just observing it, almost like there are two layers inside your mind, one that experiences life, and another that studies the one experiencing it. Most people live almost entirely in the first layer. They feel emotions as they come. They react instinctively. Their thoughts flow forward without interruption. But when the second layer wakes up, the observing mind, something changes. You begin to notice your own reactions in real time. You catch yourself before you respond to something. You hear the tone of your own voice while you're speaking. You recognize the exact moment an emotion begins rising inside you. Anger, fear, sadness, excitement. Instead of simply feeling it, you watch it appear, and that ability creates a strange kind of distance. Not emotional coldness, not detachment, just awareness. It's like standing slightly outside yourself while still being inside the experience. Some people would call that mindfulness. But for those whose minds never truly rest, it can feel like something deeper than that. Because the observing mind doesn't switch off when the moment ends. It stays active. It analyzes your decisions. It questions your reactions. It studies your behavior the same way it studies everyone else. And slowly, you begin realizing something uncomfortable. You are just as complicated as the people you observe. You notice the contradictions in your own thinking. The moments when logic and emotion collide. The times when your behavior doesn't fully match the person you believe you are. You catch yourself making assumptions. You catch yourself reacting defensively. You catch yourself hiding things emotionally, even when you believe you value honesty. That's when the mirror becomes unavoidable. Because once your mind learns to observe itself, self-deception becomes harder. You can still make mistakes. You can still have emotional reactions. You can still experience anger or insecurity or fear. But you can no longer pretend those things aren't there. Your observing mind sees them. It recognizes them immediately, and sometimes it asks questions you would rather not answer. Why did that comment bother you? Why did that person's opinion matter more than you expected? Why did you hesitate to say what you were really thinking? Those questions begin to echo quietly inside your thoughts. Not aggressively, not judgmentally, just persistently. Because the observing mind doesn't force answers, it simply refuses to ignore the questions. And this is where many people become uncomfortable with self-awareness. Because the deeper you look into your own mind, the more complexity you find. You discover parts of yourself you didn't expect. Hidden fears, unspoken desires, old emotional wounds that still influence your reactions in ways you barely noticed before. Sometimes you realize that a behavior you believed was strength was actually protection. Sometimes you realize that confidence was covering insecurity. Sometimes you realize that silence was not wisdom, but avoidance. These discoveries don't make you weak, they make you honest. But honesty with yourself can be unsettling, because it strips away the simple stories we like to tell about who we are. Instead of being a fixed identity, you begin to see yourself as a system, a living, changing structure built from experiences, memories, beliefs, and emotional patterns. And like any system, it contains contradictions, parts that agree with each other, parts that conflict, parts that evolved in response to things you experienced long ago. Your personality stops feeling like a solid object. It starts feeling like something fluid, something constantly adjusting, something still becoming. For some people, that realization creates freedom. If identity is flexible, it means you can change. It means your past doesn't permanently define you. It means growth is always possible. But for others, the realization creates a different feeling. Uncertainty, because if you are constantly changing, if your mind contains layers and contradictions and shifting perspectives, then who exactly are you? That question doesn't have a simple answer, and the observing mind rarely accepts simple answers anyway. Instead, it keeps exploring. It watches how you behave in different environments. It notices how your tone changes depending on who you're speaking with. It studies how your emotional responses shift depending on stress, fatigue, or comfort. And over time, you begin realizing something fascinating. You don't have just one identity, you have many versions of yourself. The calm version, the defensive version, the playful version, the serious version, the quiet observer, the emotional reactor. Different situations activate different parts of you, and none of them are fake. They're all real pieces of the same internal system, but understanding that system takes time, because the mind is not simple. It contains memories you forgot you had, beliefs you absorbed without realizing it, emotional patterns formed years before you understood why they existed. Sometimes the observing mind traces a reaction back to something unexpected, a childhood moment, a past betrayal, a moment of embarrassment that quietly shaped your confidence. And suddenly, something you never questioned before begins to make sense. Your reactions have history. Your fears have roots. Your habits were built slowly, often without your conscious involvement. The observing mind starts mapping those connections. It builds a kind of internal landscape, a mental map of how your experiences shaped who you became. And once that map starts forming, you begin understanding yourself in a deeper way. You become less surprised by your reactions, less confused by your emotions, less critical of your imperfections, because you see where they came from. But the journey doesn't stop there. Eventually, the observing mind asks an even bigger question. If I can watch my thoughts, then who exactly is doing the watching? That question has puzzled thinkers for centuries, because the observer inside the mind feels strangely separate from the thoughts it observes. Thoughts appear. Emotions rise, memories surface, but something deeper is simply aware of them, quiet, still, unmoved by the constant activity of the mind. Some people describe that awareness as consciousness. Some call it the true self. Some simply call it presence. Whatever name you give it, once you notice it, you realize something extraordinary. Your thoughts are not you. Your emotions are not you. They are experiences passing through awareness, but awareness itself remains constant, watching, silent. This realization changes how you relate to your own mind. Instead of being trapped inside every thought, you begin observing them. You see fear arise without immediately believing it. You see anger appear without instantly acting on it. You see insecurity form without allowing it to define your worth. The observing mind creates space. Space between stimulus and reaction. Space between emotion and decision. And in that space, something powerful happens. Choice. You begin choosing how to respond instead of reacting automatically. You begin deciding which thoughts deserve attention and which can simply pass. You begin shaping your own behavior with intention instead of habit. That level of awareness is rare, because it requires something most people avoid. Looking directly at their own mind, not the polished version, not the socially acceptable version, but the full complexity of it, the fears, the contradictions, the unfinished parts still evolving. And once you've seen that complexity clearly, something interesting happens. You stop fearing it, because you realize something important. Your mind may contain darkness, but it also contains understanding. It may contain confusion, but it also contains the ability to learn. It may contain pain, but it also contains the capacity to transform that pain into insight. The observing mind becomes more than just a witness. It becomes a guide, a quiet intelligence inside you that notices patterns, learns from mistakes, and slowly shapes your path forward. And the more you listen to that awareness, the more you realize something extraordinary. The mind that once felt overwhelming is also the mind capable of understanding itself, and that understanding may be the most powerful thing a human being can develop. Because when you truly understand your own mind, the world becomes much harder to control you with.